Thank you very much for joining us this morning. So, morning to Peran.
Morning, how is everyone? Thank you for joining.
And this morning we're going to be talking about cross-border e-commerce for China. And never has there been a better time to be embarking on this journey if it's your first time and you've basically just done cross-border in a sort of basic method up to date. So I've been in the market for 7 years now. It feels a lot longer in actual fact. I launched Emerging Communications 5 years ago. Previous to that, I worked for another Chinese agency, and I have Chinese team here in London and in Shanghai as well. And I've negotiated countless partnerships with Chinese companies, not to mention worked with Chinese and British companies on gaining traction targeting global Chinese. So good morning, Peran. Do you want to just introduce yourself before we get going?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Hey everyone, I'm Peran, country manager for Connect Plus. We're essentially a platform that enables brands to sell cross-border to China on WeChat. So over the last few years in the UK, I've kind of been getting stuck in with all of cross-border to China across multiple channels. So here to kind of share some insights and thinking with you today.
What are we going to cover today? So the first thing is to look at the market. How has it changed post-COVID? What are the opportunities and why you should act now and not leave it until 2021? We can't do that without looking at the challenges, the common challenges that a lot of e-commerce players face when being successful in China. And we're going to talk about how to overcome those challenges. And then we're going to talk specifically about the WeChat channel as a conduit for e-commerce to China because of its sheer speed of setup and the integration with payments and logistics we'll talk about a little bit later. I will then finish off talking about how marketing, what sort of channels that we might use and how we can gain traction in the China market using our WeChat e-commerce store. So where are we now? We're obviously in a situation where an awful lot of our brands operating in the UK and in Europe have significant capacity issues. So whereas the inbound market was very, very important before, we've obviously got no tourists here in the UK at the moment, and we are very reliant on domiciled Chinese shoppers in order to make up the quota. And then you have the additional fact that you can only have so many in stores. So in order to capitalize on the Chinese market, there really is no other way now than to actually operate cross-border e-commerce. And a lot of our brands say to us, well, will somebody in China pay for my brand in the UK or pay for my brand in Italy for cross-border? And the answer is quite definitively yes, provided that you can build the brand and the credibility and the brand equity around your company so that there is a demand for your product. It's really, really important that you do that. And we will talk about that more when we talk about marketing, so that it's very much apparent why somebody should shop cross-border and why they're not going to get a local brand instead, or why they're not going to get a global brand that's already operating in bricks and mortar or e-commerce in China. So we'll talk about in a second how you know when the time is right, because that's a fairly critical piece. But there is still demand, and that demand has gone up, and that demand has gone up significantly post-COVID. So let's just talk about the common challenges and how brands find themselves on this webinar today. So an awful lot of brands that we speak to, it happens by accident, quite simply. You suddenly start getting a lot of sales, you track them in Google Analytics, you see that they are mainland China sales, not Hong Kong or Singapore, and you start to pick and pack, much the same way you do for the rest of the world. But then it starts to cause a number of issues. So you start with, okay, I'm going to have a Chinese part of our website and just hope that they can access it. The next step might be, well, actually, there is an API for WeChat Pay or Alipay. We'll add that to our existing global site and our subdomain for China. And you might even invest in an international courier because it makes it an awful lot easier to get through customs. And you'll then start to invest in WeChat Weibo or maybe Little Red Book. So you'll do a little bit of social media marketing. But really all you've done is localized your existing Western e-commerce offering. You haven't actually localized the platform. So after a while, when you start doing significant volume, you're going to come across a couple of issues. The first one that we see all the time is international payment settlement. So if you've got an integration with Alipay and WeChat Pay and China Union Pay, brilliant, because that's expected, a prerequisite for e-commerce for Chinese customers. If you haven't, you're going to have a problem because they won't be able to pay. And quick payment in a method that is trusted by your audiences is absolutely paramount. But it goes beyond that. Even if you've got the payment set up on your global website, then you've got to get your products through customs. This is going to significantly increase the delivery times to get your product to your consumers in China. And it depends on what somebody's buying. If somebody's buying a high value ticket item, they might wait a week or so. And if they're not, they won't. And so everybody knows, or should know at least, how quickly the expectations have changed in China. So now your audience will wait longer for cross-border because they want your product from Europe or from the US. But that comes with a caveat that they're not going to have to wait for it to get through customs, or God forbid, actually be charged additional amount of money. And finally, you've got to find these customers. So if you're a Western website that has basically localized into a subdomain Chinese website and they can't access it, that could be slow download speeds because it's not hosted correctly. That could just be simply the UX or the shopping. Basically, the design of the website is very westernized. It's not for your Chinese customers. It's not relevant. It may be that the copy hasn't actually been translated properly. We see that a lot. People use Google Translate. They don't copyright each individual product page, category page, or SKU. And it could be something as simple as you're not tracking the performance all the way through the e-commerce journey, so you don't actually know why your customers might be dropping off. So any number of these things can cause significant challenges for British and European brands. And what do you end up with? You end up with a very disgruntled customers, who then start to make a noise on social media, who start to make a noise on your platforms. And in some ways, a lot of our brands have actually used this as a way of knowing how to do things better. But more importantly, you just need to make sure that you're not in a situation where you've started getting late orders, lost orders, increased returns, complaints, because you're then going to end up with bad PR, bad sentiment. And it's going to damage your brand very, very quickly. And we've seen a lot of brands do this when they've done very big pushes on 11/11 or Chinese New Year or Christmas. And they may have just done one tiny thing in the whole journey. Like there was a situation a couple of years ago with a brand I heard of where they just did a typo and said £1 instead of £100 for a unit. And of course, they then had to honour those sales, which went into the thousands because there were so many disgruntled customers. So it really does need to be thought about. So what do you need to do for best practice for Chinese e-commerce? Now, we do an awful lot of webinars and an awful lot of training sessions around this, but you are talking about the most spoilt consumers in the world. They expect things now. They expect things literally. You go onto whatever platform you're using, whether that be WeChat, whether you're on Tmall, and you expect to get your product pretty damn quickly, depending on what the value is. Now, with cross-border, you will have a little bit more patience, but speedy delivery is a prerequisite. You're not going to wait weeks for a pair of shoes. The second thing is, if you want to ask questions about any of the products on the store, you expect that somebody will answer you in China real time. So customer services element, normally on WeChat, and normally something that is very clearly visually displayed on the store. So if they have a question, or there's a problem with their order, or they've suddenly got something stuck in customs, or there's just something not right about their order, they need to be able to resolve that very quickly and from your standpoint away from the public domain. Transparent pricing. If I've paid £60 for a product plus shipping, I don't expect then for things to be stuck in customs for me to be paying extra, because obviously that then means that the whole price I paid was significantly more, not to mention the aggro of having to sort it out. That's going to cause a lot of disgruntled customers. And good reviews. They are going to, we'll talk about this in the marketing element of this webinar, they're going to expect that they can read good reviews, user-generated content from other customers about your brand. And absence of that, rings alarm bells with consumers in China, because that's the way things are done. It's all peer-to-peer recommendation, social media recommendation, user-generated content, video, so on and so forth. This is absolutely crucial. So one has to have the right channel and one has to have the right marketing to ensure that your customers can actually see other customers happy with the product and showing that they're happy with the product. So what we call them key opinion customers. And that's what will quite often, in terms of them being in the basket and about to hit the pay button, will make all the difference. And that also extends to brand messaging, being on brand, making sure you've got the right copywriting and making sure you've got the right marketing, right the way down to the finite customer groups that you're targeting. And this is kind of the holy grail, really, of e-commerce or of any marketing in China, is knowing who your customers are. And I would say for anybody on this webinar who doesn't know who their customer segments are, or Chinese customers are, and they haven't got that information from existing customers, from Google Analytics, from having done some research, that's where you need to start. Because only then is the messaging you're going to do, is it going to be relevant? Is it going to resonate? And is it going to work and convert? Only if it's relevant to those audiences. The next question to ask ourselves as a brand is, when is the right time to invest in a proper Chinese e-commerce platform and Chinese e-commerce marketing? There will be a number of triggers, or green lights as we call them, here at Emerging Communications, which will tell you as a brand, now is the time to invest. Now is the time to do this properly. They could be increased amounts of user-generated content that you find on all sorts of platforms across Weibo, Little Red Book, WeChat, Juhu, any of the platforms, Bilibili, TikTok. If you're finding customers are talking positively about your brand, and let's hope it's positive, and if they're showing the product, then that is a really good sign that you need to invest a little bit more and go the extra step. Increase sales volumes through Google Analytics from mainland China. Increase footfall in any of your stores, with an awful lot of what we used to have, a lot of also Daigou, who would spend in the UK, Europe or the US and take those products home. Now, obviously that's been badly impacted due to travel at the moment, but we've still got online Daigou. So do you have very, very big groups of Daigou? Do you have very, very big groups of customers coming in store and asking to buy products? Are there an increased number of difficulties and complaints around deliveries and payments that you know you need to resolve in order to get more customers? And are they causing bad PR? Are they causing an awful lot of resource issues your end? And lastly, brand control and IP. One of the big threats that any brand has is copycats in China. Let's face it, China is exceptionally good at copying brands in China very, very quickly. And it's actually very, very hard quite often to decipher between the real brand and the counterfeit. You need to make sure that you are protecting your brand and making sure you've trademarked your name, making sure that you've got the right domain, making sure that you've protected your IP. That also extends to having your own channel, so that basically what doesn't happen is that Daigou or other forms of shopping agents in China don't just sell your product on their own channels and control the brand essentially. And this is how an awful lot of brands that we speak to find out that they've even got demand in China, is somebody else is controlling their channel. It could be a distributor. It doesn't have to be Daigou. So having brand control is also very, very important. I'm going to move on to Peran now to talk about what are the options for cross-border. Before we talk about WeChat, we have to talk about what are the channels available to you as a brand that you can leverage right now in China to target Chinese shoppers. Over to you, Peran.
Thank you. So as Domenica's just discussed, as a brand, you've realized that China is a potential market for you, and you've demonstrated some sort of awareness or driving some level of sales. And where's the next place you're going to start to look? I mean, two of the kind of key platforms, and they're identified as marketplaces, would be Tmall Global or JD International. These are platforms where you appear amongst thousands of other brands. So, I mean, first of all, with Tmall Global, they have over 22,000 international brands on the platform. So it's very aggressive. But the one thing that they can guarantee is the traffic. They're very sales-driven channels. So if we're looking at the advantages and disadvantages for both, Tmall, huge market share, over 50% of market share of the cross-border e-commerce market. And they also have huge shopping festivals throughout the year. Obviously, Double 11/Singles Day will be the one that stands out coming up in November. Another kind of key reason why brands will often look to Tmall Global as a starting place is that they have the ability to provide the complete solution. So rather than having to go completely on your own as a brand to find your payment partner, find your logistics partner, find someone who's going to run the customer service from China, they can provide between Tmall and the TP or the trade partner, will be able to provide that whole solution, provide you with your marketing strategy, your performance marketing plan, also your customer service, store operations. This often is very attractive for brands that want to start out in the market. On the other hand, though, what this means is that because they have such big market share, it's super aggressive. It's very hard to get on the platform. You can't just arrive, speak to Tmall or speak to a TP and say, I want to be on Tmall Global, and in a month's time, you'll be on the platform. There's very rigorous rating systems that you have to go through. And the platform's also not suitable for all categories. I mean, they're primarily most advantageous for beauty, cosmetics, health and supplements, and mother and baby as well. Another potential disadvantage of the platform is the increasing advertising costs. So we're continually seeing year by year that the CPM or the cost per click is increasing on these platforms, making it more and more competitive to really perform well on your presence on Tmall Global. The other marketplace which you may have kind of come across or may have spoken to before would be JD International. So relatively similar to Tmall Global, the differences or their selling points is their two sort of operational models. They can offer a reseller model whereby they purchase the products from the brand and sell them themselves and run the store themselves from the platform. And the advantage of this is it ensures there's a very high quality of brands, high quality products that JD themselves are very confident that they can sell on the platform. So you can be quite comfortable that you're on a marketplace where there are high quality demanded products from Chinese consumers. But the other model that JD offers is the self-operated model. So whilst JD have the most advanced logistics solution and offering in mainland China, and also for cross-border, they can help you with finding the right kind of trade partners and operating partners, but they allow you to have your own brand store on JD International. Compared to Tmall is a comparatively lower deposit. So Tmall, they've slightly reduced recently, but not long ago you were looking at, say, £15,000 deposit, depends on the category. For JD, looking more around 10,000, 15,000 US dollars. It's actually slightly decreased from that as well, as they're trying to entice more and more brands onto the channel. So of course, you don't want to be putting these deposits down unless you're confident that your brand is going to be successful on these platforms. So it creates a kind of gap that creates an opportunity to say, hey, maybe a marketplace might be a good thing for me in the future, but I need to prove the concept a bit more, prove my brand in the China market first. Another kind of limitation of JD, likewise with Tmall, but even more so, is the limited product categories. So whereas maybe not so relevant for apparel or jewelry, etc., it's kind of more of a downfall of the platform. So as opposed to the marketplaces, the other sort of direction which is growing massively in China right now is through social commerce. So combining social media with e-commerce or within one platform or one ecosystem. One of the main platforms that we have in China is Xiaohongshu or Little Red Book. It's a platform. Key advantages is they have a consumer base with a very high propensity to purchase. And what this means is that they're always on the platform looking for new brands, new products, what's hot in China right now, to read reviews from KOLs and key opinion consumers. So there's a very high level of trust between these reviews and UGC and the users of the platform. So this means that they're ready to buy. They're looking for something to buy. On the other hand, there's a very small, it's a big consumer group, but it's very targeted. You're looking at young female consumers, started predominantly around cosmetics and beauty, but is starting to widen out between some fashion brands, but still very focused on that younger female millennial Gen Z consumer. As a brand, looking to sell cross-border with Little Red Book, one of the key advantages is that they do provide their own logistics solutions for key countries in the world. So UK, US, Australia, for example, they can provide the logistics, which is obviously a key pain point for many brands looking to sell cross-border. On the other hand, many of the stores right now on Little Red Book are run by resellers. So what you'll have is a reseller based in China that will be buying products from a particular brand, say in the UK, and then setting up the store on Little Red Book in China and running that store from there. So it can become more difficult to distinguish, okay, am I buying from the brand, or am I just buying from a reseller in China of this particular brand? As a result, it's become a better channel more for product seeding. So using that great KOL, KOC base to write reviews and upload content about your products for the Chinese consumer to kind of indulge in, and then they will go elsewhere to complete the purchase, i.e. they might search for your mini program on WeChat, or they might search for your Tmall store. Obviously, Xiaohongshu with media investment can lead to Tmall for purchase. The other social commerce channel, which is obviously the biggest social channel in China, 1.2 billion monthly active users, is WeChat, which I'm sure everyone would have heard of. And one of the first things you hear when you look at China is saying, I must have a WeChat account. And yes, maybe you need a WeChat account, but what are you going to do with it? Obviously, simple links out to your website in English is going to create a very fragmented user journey. So WeChat has become this platform for social commerce with the help of WeChat Mini Programs, which I'll discuss in more detail shortly. One of the key advantages of using WeChat for selling cross-border is that you have full brand control. You own your WeChat official account and your content, your marketing. You own your store, and you can work with partners to run your store or run in-house if you have your Chinese team. You can make your mini program and your WeChat store, for example, look exactly how you like it to look, and also update it in real time if you're using the right platforms. And on top of that, you also have full flexibility with your advertising budget, whereas the marketplaces is quite aggressive in investing quite a high percentage of your GMV into marketing. On WeChat, you can start small. You can invest in the smaller KOLs. You can allocate smaller levels of budget into different marketing formats that Domenica will go into later, and start to test and learn and see what works best, what's driving sales and what's resonating with the consumer. And then obviously another key advantage of WeChat is its seamless integration with social content. So that ability to post social content on WeChat that can lead directly to a product page. So a Chinese consumer can complete the whole purchase journey within 3, 4, 5 clicks, depending on how you've designed your store. Some of the disadvantages of WeChat, mainly it's a relatively closed ecosystem. So whereas you have Weibo, where you can use hashtags for content to more organically disperse around the platform, on WeChat it's far more closed. So you have to invest in the KOLs, the performance marketing, in order for people to find your brand and start to follow your account and build that brand equity. From an e-commerce perspective, it's become quite difficult for brands. WeChat don't offer a cross-border solution themselves. They don't package up the customer service, the store operations, the marketing, and kind of sell that into brands. You're left alone to find your marketing partner, your e-commerce partner, someone who can also run the customer service and the performance marketing, and also finding your payment partner for WeChat Pay as well, which can make it quite daunting, and you have to speak to many people to try and find the best solution to sell on WeChat. It's something that's getting better, and I mean, why we're here talking today is that it's something that many people are making easier, and WeChat want it to be as easy as possible for brands to start selling in cross-border, as they see it as a big opportunity for the platform itself. Kind of coming back to what I said, there's often the way up between, it's usually Tmall or WeChat. These are once with Domenica and myself, usually these conversations, these are the two platforms they're weighing up. So marketplace or social commerce. It's definitely not an either or question. It definitely comes down to where your brand is currently at in the China market right now. For example, if you've demonstrated a small level of awareness, you see some traction amongst Chinese consumers, but you're really not ready to go onto an aggressive sales channel like Tmall. WeChat provides the opportunity to start building your brand within the platform, start testing some media formats, some KOLs, and really starting to see what the result is of that. Coming back to my point that you're all within one ecosystem and you have a fully tracked user journey right the way from kind of the media or the KOL right the way through the purchase. So you can start to really understand who your consumers are, and then later look at the more aggressive or like the sales driven channels like Tmall or like JD, because then you know who you should be targeting. When you're investing high percentages of GMV in advertising, you know it's allocated in the right way in which you can drive sales. On the other hand, there's brands, for example, beauty and cosmetic brands, which are very well suited for Tmall. You can find a good trade partner. They will help you and kind of hold your hand with all of your marketing strategy, and Tmall works great. And then later, WeChat can become the better channel because you own the data. So what we see brands starting to do is they've had a presence on Tmall, and then later down the line, or not long after, you start to build your WeChat official account, maybe open your WeChat Mini Program as well, and have this as your kind of brand hub, where this is where you want your loyal fans that are going to be repeat purchasing throughout the year, because you own that data and you can start to understand these consumers on a far deeper level than what you would through Tmall. Just to kind of summarize what we've been through, so cross-border e-commerce, absolutely on the rise and never more so than today. Now travel isn't taking place, and Chinese consumers are demanding niche brands that are not available in China. Whilst marketplaces like Tmall and JD, they offer a complete solution, they're not suitable for every brand. But a brand-owned approach like that on WeChat can be quite daunting, and there's a number of challenges in kind of finding the right partners to set up and run your store. Social commerce are providing very kind of great brand-owned approach to test the market on smaller levels of budget and really understand how your brand can kind of propel into the China market in the future. So as I mentioned, I'm now going to look more into WeChat Mini Programs and how to sort of start out, how to build your store, and how to get everything up and running. So WeChat Mini Programs, last year, crazy growth in sales, over 800 billion RMB in GMV. And in the first Q1 and Q2 of this year, that's been up 600%. So brands are really looking towards mini programs right now. You even see luxury brands having their mini program as their sort of brand hub, using it for pop-ups, flash sales, limited edition products. Another kind of key advantage of mini programs is that they allow you to leverage that WeChat user base, 1.1, almost 1.2 million monthly active users now. It provides the brands the ability to offer a complete user journey within WeChat. So whilst you're running your WeChat official account for your social content, you then have a mini program which you can like as your app that doesn't require any download within the ecosystem to provide that e-commerce customer journey. Also, another key advantage, which kind of goes in an advantage compared to the marketplaces, is that you can leverage this social commerce trend in China. So social sharing, there's many tactics that brands are using right now. Just as example, group purchasing. If multiple consumers are buying the same product from your store, they can get a small discount, or, I mean, it's completely autonomous up to the brand on the discount. But this really encourages that organic sharing within the ecosystem, which in essence can lower your acquisition costs and of Chinese consumers within the platform. When it comes to setting up your store, there's a number of considerations, of course, that you need to take into account. Firstly, operations. How am I going to start my store, upload products? How am I going to manage the orders on a day-to-day basis, manage campaigns within my store? Likewise, customer service. How do I deal with pre-sales inquiries, which are super important with Chinese consumers? How do I manage the other queries, returns, complaints? Finance. How do I even accept RMB payments and have that settled in my international bank outside of China? And then fourthly, the marketing. So how are consumers going to find my store, find my official account? I'm firstly going to go into the kind of operational part, looking at the cross-border shipping. So traditionally, brands selling cross-border to China would use what we would call a personal postage shipping. Essentially, if I went to Royal Mail, posted a product to China, a parcel to China right now, there'd be no tax involved, but it might get stopped at customs. It might not. It used to be around 5 to 10% of products that would be stopped at customs, particularly now with COVID. A huge amount higher percentage of products have been stopped in order to these to be checked. And what this means is that the consumer then needs to pay the tax and customs and duties after they've purchased the product. which really isn't an optimized kind of purchase experience for a Chinese consumer. So there are now these two new models for cross-border. Scenario one, which we have here, is for predominantly for higher value products over £575, 5,000 RMB. For these products, the tax rate is relatively high, it's 20%, but the customer can provide their Chinese ID and copy to customs to pay that customs upfront. The second, which is known as the BC or BBC model, which is by far the favored model for brands selling cross-border to China. And what this means is that it's providing a far more streamlined purchase experience for those Chinese consumers in China. Once they purchase the product, tax, customs, and duties are all added onto the price of the product upfront, and the e-commerce channel is integrated with China customs. What this means is that as soon as these products reach China customs, they're already passed through, being that they have all of the information required. So this completely eliminates the delay that many brands will see in cross-border shipping to China. There are a number of limits, i.e. the package cannot exceed around £575, and the consumer also has a yearly capped limit of how much they can spend on products within this cross-border category throughout the year. But from our experience, I mean, we've seen brands before that have, we've seen consumers before that would also just get their friend to purchase the product for them, and then they transfer them the money on WeChat Pay. So whilst they seem like restrictions, in reality, they're really not much so. So creating a brand-owned logistics approach, in order to provide this BC shipping, this real official cross-border shipping to China, it's super important that you work with an e-commerce platform that's integrated with China customs. So essentially what this means is that as soon as that consumer has purchased your product, i.e. on your WeChat store, this pushes your order information, payment information, and also the logistics bill to China customs in order for that to be passed through as soon as that product is shipped into mainland China. A number of platforms, for example, just as Connect Plus on the right, enables the consumer to input their Chinese ID up front. So you no longer have to kind of go back to this customer, keep asking them for their Chinese ID, asking them for that they put the wrong payment information in. It's all very streamlined and allows them to complete a purchase in a number of clicks. When it comes to payments, obviously, when it comes to purchasing in China, and this even goes for cross-border, has to be on mobile. Mobile is absolutely key, and 84% of Chinese consumers are shopping via smartphone. And what this means is that they're all paying on mobile as well. So 790 million mobile payment users in China. The mobile payment market is saturated with, there's two big players, Alipay, WeChat Pay, and Chinese making up 94% market share there. And what you'll find is that most of these mobile payment users will use both. They'll have Alipay more often for the higher priced items or their bills or their rent, and WeChat Pay for more day-to-day or shopping online, for example. So when it comes to setting up your WeChat store, having WeChat Pay is absolutely crucial. Working with a payment service provider who can settle these payments for you outside of China. Essentially, once you've onboarded with this payment service provider, they can accept the RMB payments through your WeChat store, and they settle this payment within usually around T+2 days. So it's a very quick solution compared to what many brands have experienced in the past with working with WeChat payment service providers. And essentially, this provides a far more streamlined consumer journey as well. Completing WeChat Pay has all of your information within WeChat already to complete the purchase. When it comes to operation, it all sometimes sounds daunting, but it doesn't have to be all singing or dancing from the very start. You can start small. You can upload manually onto a platform a limited number of SKUs. You can see what performs well. You don't have to integrate with all of your key major your e-commerce system from the very start. You can manually manage these through a CSV file, for example, just to kind of understand what products are working on your store. And then that leads into a more fully integrated solution. So eventually, once you've proven the concept, proven it works, that your brand works, you can then start to integrate what you use for your WeChat store into your major e-commerce system, i.e. Shopify, Magento. This can be the inventory, so all of the order management, but right the way down to product information management as well. Customer service, as Domenica mentioned earlier, is obviously absolutely key. And if you're providing a WeChat store, offering customer service within WeChat is absolutely essential. Chinese consumers will do a lot of research and pre-sales inquiries. So ensuring you have that customer service, i.e. a live chat, readily available from your store means that you can convert better. You can provide more kind of bespoke answers to queries from Chinese consumers. And the reason this is WeChat is far more relevant is Chinese consumers aren't really using email addresses. So it's very unlikely that they'll come to your website, they'll be browsing through your website, find your customer service email, then send you an email. It's very unlikely that this would really happen. So offering something in a familiar platform is absolutely key if you were looking to start your WeChat store. You can leverage a range of tools, so live chat tools that can be implemented into your mini program, and then either run customer service in-house if you have your Chinese-speaking customer service, or use a third party for all the customer service queries. So when it comes to setting up, essentially, as Domenica mentioned, it can be done super quick compared to the likes of the marketplaces. So you'd be up and running in around 30 days. Starting out with registering your WeChat overseas official account and your mini program, also applying at the same time for your merchant ID with the payment service provider. So these can be run in parallel. Then managing the inventory, so onboarding with the logistics provider. Are they going to pick up the stock from your warehouse? Are you going to use the logistics partner's fulfillment center? And then also registering your products with customs, which they can do as a guarantor. Then OMS, WMS integration, so all of your order management and warehouse management integration, if required. Again, as I mentioned, this can be done at a later stage. Then setting up your store. So we would always recommend to use a content management system to set up your mini program, drag and drop tools to simply create the banners, upload the products and merchandise. And then finally, submitting your mini program to Tencent with a pilot and then launching. So as you can see, it's a very straightforward process. And after that, it really comes down to how you're going to start driving that traffic. So I'm going to pass back over to Domenica.
Thank you very much. That was really informative. And I think the simplest way I've ever seen it put, because e-commerce is and can be complicated for a lot of brands. So thank you. So we've talked about setting up a channel, an e-commerce channel for cross-border. That's half the battle. The next thing is to ensure that the customers that you are targeting and you've identified in China can actually find your brand, actually get to hear about your brand. Now, a number of you have very kindly submitted questions. We've got 14 questions currently in the panel. I will be answering these with Peran at the end, and hopefully I can answer some of them now. So there are a number of options open to you if you use WeChat as your e-commerce channel in terms of driving both awareness and ultimately driving sales. It's worth noting that WeChat is a closed platform, as Peran said, and as we mentioned at the beginning. So one really needs to look at ways to leverage building traffic within your own WeChat store, within your own WeChat channel via WeChat, as well as other external platforms that are more open source, and you can use those to also drive traffic to WeChat. So I'm going to cover both of those off. So the most obvious one is to use WeChat banner ads or WeChat moment ads. These have become easier for cross-border brands over the last year or so. The legislation's got a lot easier in order to do those if you're not a Chinese entity. However, one thing I would say is one has to balance two things when you're looking at driving traffic, brand awareness and sales on WeChat, which is cost versus return. And generally speaking, WeChat moment ads, banner ads, and advertising within WeChat channel is actually quite expensive. And so we try and balance out with our brands different types of traffic generating activity, not only to test which works best with your target segments, they all hang out in different places, but also which is going to get the best return, the best KPI, the lowest cost per click and the highest acquisition rate. So it goes without saying. So the number of things open to you are video advertising, WeChat moment ads, mini program ads, so on and so forth. It really depends on how much traffic you have. If it's a completely new platform, so the platform or the account is new as well as the store, then I would suggest that as well as WeChat advertising, you also look to other channels as well to drive traffic through to WeChat. We talked earlier on about user-generated content. This for me is the holy grail of any marketing activity in China, especially for consumer brands. Can work for B2B as well, but it's very, very important that you look at the most important thing first, which is what target segments are we targeting in China? Who are our customers and where do they hang out? Peran talked a little bit about Little Red Book. We're using this an awful lot at the moment as a marketing acquisition tool to basically be a really, really good starting point for a lot of social e-commerce activity. So choose the right channels for your audiences. These are only a few of the channels that are available to you. The most important being obviously within the WeChat environment, Weibo, Little Red Book, Douyin, Bilibili, Zhihu. But what you're looking to do is you're looking to leverage user-generated content that has been supplied by your customer base. We'll talk about KOCs in a minute. So you need to encourage that. If you're a B2C brand, you can run competitions to positively encourage shares, referrals, to get your customers to talk about their experience with you, to actually show off what they bought with you, whether that be video, whether that be photography. It is extremely powerful. And do not underestimate user-generated content as a conduit to drive traffic and sales. Let's face it, if you're going to buy something from a brand in Europe, in the US, cross-border, you're going to want to know customers have had a good experience, that customers have really enjoyed using that brand. So you want to see that somebody has used your product. And in fact, even better, if user-generated content, especially in the beauty and fashion and apparel industry, is actually showing somebody unboxing or actually using your product, that's even more powerful. So really, really important to have this as part of any of your outreach program. This moves me on to KOLs. You can't really be in the China market without leveraging KOLs in some ways. But what an awful lot of brands make the mistake of doing is putting all of their eggs into one basket and all of their budget into one huge superseding KOL with a huge audience. That is just going to use up all your budget. So I would say that the balancing act is a bit like a seesaw. How can I balance the number of channels that I have operated, where my customers hang out, versus the investment I want to put in versus the return that I need? Because KOLs come in all sorts of guises. We use KOLs from big celebrity mega KOLs for huge big consumer brands versus what I call product seeders. And those that are very, very good at, say, live streaming, you know, and this actually goes to education and selling education online now, properties and selling property online. It's not just what I would call the FMCG markets. So who are your endorsers? Who are the people that are credible in your industry? Who are the people that are followed in your industry? Because that will again determine who your KOL mix should be. You know, could you use we media? Or are you better off using a niche KOL? So for example, if you're in the F&B market, wine merchants that we've got on this webinar, then you really should be looking at KOLs that are particularly important in food and drink. If you're in apparel and sportswear, then you need KOLs that are well known in the sportswear industry, so on and so forth. And key opinion consumers, which I'll get onto in a second, which are a really, really missed opportunity. And as you can see on this example here, I've actually got one on my team. And so within my 28 strong Chinese staff at Emerging Communications, I have no less than 5 KOLs in their own right, covering food and drink, travel and hospitality, and football. And so KOLs come in all sorts of guises. And what you're really after is basically their match with your audience. Do your audience follow them? Do your audience interact with them? Because that's what you want. And you want that KOL to go out with your messaging and your branding, and to make sure that then brings traffic back to your store. And often we will be negotiating with KOLs cost per acquisition, or even some kind of target of how many they need to sell for that promotional output. So the days of just doing pure outreach without there being a KPI are long gone in China. And that brings me on to my favorite topic that I talk about a lot at the moment, which is KOCs, which is key opinion consumers. And you'll find key opinion consumers in every single sector, B2B, B2C, whether it be pharma, whether it be wine, food and drink, whether it be sports and apparel, whether it be beauty. You need to identify who your key customers are for China. And you can do this by market research. You can do this via Google Analytics. You can do it through many means. And you need to really harness the power of these KOCs. Obviously, the more notoriety you have in China and the more you do in China, the more KOCs you'll get. But it's these key opinion consumers that when they post their experience and they post your product, their unboxing or using of your product or bidding over the product, that's when it makes a difference, because they've got a lot of followers. Not just a lot of followers, the right followers, your potential consumers. And so it makes a really big difference. And so we even, with some of our brands, will leverage and find the right KOCs for the right target segments and use them as part of our marketing channel mix. We can use them as a part of an affiliate program or referral campaign. So again, this all comes down to the basics of who are you targeting with what message, because that then will mean that it's easier to identify the right KOLs, the right KOCs, and the right media mix. But it can be exceptionally effective in some industries, even if it's just a gifting campaign that you're asking the KOCs to go out to their audience with, can be a very effective acquisition tool. So what do you need to consider? It isn't just as simple with KOLs or KOCs as just saying, oh, they look like they've actually worked with one of my competitors, I think they'll do. Be very vigilant. Do your due diligence. It is the same way that you would do a media affiliation with a magazine sort of 15, 20 years ago. Make sure that you are and have done your due diligence on that particular individual. Make sure that there's not any bad PR that you need to know about that may have come and gone, that could be dragged up and could in some way damage your brand. Make sure that they are focused on the market and not just purely payments. So it's very important that the influencer and the endorser has authenticity. And all too often, KOLs are a bit like a media play and nothing more. The authenticity is something that's so important to your potential customers. They will see right through it if it's a KOL that's been paid to endorse your product and only paid to endorse your product and doesn't believe in your product. They really need to believe in your brand, because that will come across in all of their comms. And that is something that your customers will see straight through. Make sure you track everything, and make sure you've put in the tracking to track everything so that you know exactly what's happened from that KOL activation right the way through to the store basket. Also, get expert opinion on your messaging. So when we work with KOLs, we're curating the content with them, whether that be video, whether that be photography, whether that be the supporting of an event or a PR launch. We're curating the storyboard so that it will work with their audience and it's on brand. You need to make sure that you haven't just handed over your IP to the KOL or KOC to do what they want, or you're going to be in trouble. And test. So test different KOLs, different KOC groups, different channels, measure it. And then the channels that perform the best in your market with your customers, you obviously do more of that. Sounds pretty obvious, but all too often people overcomplicate it, and it is back to basic marketing. You know, which part of the marketing has worked the best? We'll do more of that. Thank you very much. And let's not forget private traffic. Private traffic, when you start to build up a community, is really important that you can have separate groups within your community on WeChat. We do this a lot in retail and multi-level brand retail. We do it a lot in apparel, a lot in beauty, because you could just have a group of all your key KOCs. You could have a group of some of your key customers that behave in a certain way. You can give them offers. You can talk to them separately away from a much larger community. They could be your platinum customers. How you divvy that up into your private traffic groups is up to the brand, and you can take advice on that. But you'll see this is becoming really, really important as well. For brands are also leveraging private traffic groups within communities, within own media and within channels. You can do it either within your own WeChat or within other groups as well. Really, really effective. But this is just some of the touch points that a brand should be looking at as part of driving traffic and sales to WeChat. You're looking at advertising and KOL touch points. Obviously, they're direct traffic generating sources coming directly to your WeChat account. You could be looking at any kind of social commerce push. So it could be weekly flash sales, if that's going to be right for your brand. If you're luxury, probably not. Seasonal limited editions, very important in apparel and beauty. Group purchasing, this is really, really important. If you're in the FMCG market and there is going to be a benefit to a large group of people buying your product, they get it cheaper and you're obviously getting volume, it's another channel. It's much the same way that retail channels work with their B2B channels or wholesale channels, but you're just doing it with consumers. This is becoming very, very big business in China. It's a bit like a separate Daigou market, but it's really your customer base. Also using gift cards, using VIP cards, using, CRM tools, gamification, community and live streaming. There are so many different touch points, but all that you need to come back to all the time is our customers that we've identified in China, those particular segments we've identified that will buy our brand. What do they want? How do they shop? Where do they shop? Where do they get inspiration? There's absolutely no point having a WeChat store or a WeChat mini program or a WeChat account and not doing anything to drive traffic. And one thing I would urge brands to look at is to look at different channels that are also sort of more outreach channels, like Weibo, like Juhu, like programmatic, like KOLs, as well as advertising within the WeChat environment. That way you're covering both of your bases in terms of where your consumers are going to hang out. So just getting back to Q&As now. And the first one is, you've obviously got so many different e-commerce channels available to brands. We've talked about them in very much a summation because we've only got an hour. You've got the likes of the Alibaba, and you've got Tencent groups, you've got Tmall, you've got JD, but you've also got WeChat. Do you recommend that brands do both? At what point would you recommend brands might do both, or should they choose one or the other?
I think it definitely depends on what stage the brand is currently at in China. If you're still relatively uncertain as to how successful you could be in the market, starting with a more brand-owned approach on WeChat would be the better solution, being that you can control your marketing budget. You're not at the mercy of a marketplace where you're amongst thousands of other brands also investing in the media on the platform, the banners, etc. But that being said, as a long-term strategy, you should definitely look to leverage different e-commerce channels in China in different ways. For example, as Domenica mentioned, you can use mini programs for flash sales, for pop-ups. But for the limited editions within WeChat, that can be a very great platform to do so. Yeah. And then you could run your full product catalog through a Tmall store or through a marketplace store. So whilst I'd say for smaller brands starting out, WeChat can be, WeChat or other social commerce is a good way to start. You can then look to offer have a different e-commerce strategy for the different channels whilst you expand in China.
I totally agree with that. The investment that one needs as a brand on JD or Tmall is significant. And so there are two things that one should do when investing in e-commerce in China. One is to learn what your customers want, what they'll pay for your brands, which SKUs are going to sell, which SKUs don't, which categories work particularly well. And it's a really good way to test it on WeChat. And then you can go, okay, we've discovered this particular category does really well. And actually, we're better off on Little Red Book, or we're better off on Tmall to actually extend that particular category. Otherwise, you're going to invest an awful lot of money in a massive market research exercise that you could do on a much, much, much more confined level within WeChat. So I would say that a lot of big brands have both, and I would recommend both, because WeChat particularly, you can control your brand and your IP so much better. But if you're very, very early on in your journey and the only thing you've done to date is cross-border via your global website, then WeChat is your next step. You can then enhance that WeChat store and grow and build it out significantly with additional content and marketing content, growing the traffic, having private groups, growing your communities. And then at that point, you're probably ready for another channel. But if you're very, very early out and you're looking at return on investment, then you're going to spend all of your money, time and effort on setting up the other channels, and you certainly won't be ready much before middle of next year. Other questions. So question is, if I am going to embark on cross-border e-commerce with China and I have never done proper China logistics or China payments before, I've just literally pick and packed. You've mentioned a timeline of sort of 4, 6, 8 weeks to set this all up. Does that also include a brand completely new to China logistics and China payment?
There's the likes of kind of DHL, FedEx, for example, which can do the more traditional old school shipping to China, whereby it's not the best for the consumer. They might have to pay the tax later on. In the UK, for example, our platform is integrated with a partner that are specialized in shipping to China.
Yeah.
They can pick up from the brand warehouse in the UK. This is also offered globally, and then provide the official cross-border shipping to China, meaning that the consumer pays the tax and duties up front. With this, the setup is very straightforward, being that the logistics provider will act as that guarantor for the brand. So they can do all of the customs and duties with China customs directly, rather than the brand having to deal with that themselves, which creates, number one, very quick to set up. And number two, they're very established and they have very good relationships with all of the key kind of China customs ports to ensure that your products are passing through customs quickly and efficiently. With this sort of model, you're looking at more like 5 days for delivery, as opposed to quite often you see 3 weeks. Doesn't even include the length of time that product's stuck at customs waiting for the consumer to pay the duties.
I would add that an awful lot of brands spend an awful lot of time trying to find the right logistics partner, the right payment provider. That not only takes time, you have to do a lot of due diligence, takes time to integrate. And the whole reason that we're working with Connect Plus on this product and launching this into the market is that you want to be spending your time working out the rest of the right messaging and the right marketing to drive sales, not trying to sort out who your best logistics partner or your best payment provider is going to be. You just need to basically get a product up and running as soon as possible. So hopefully that answers that question. And the other question that we've been asked is actually around targeting consumers, which I will answer. So the question is, Domenica, how do we know who to target with our brand offering in China? The first thing I would say is, don't make the assumption that a lot of brands do, that there's a lot of people in China and they'll like your product or your brand. Do some research. This doesn't need to be an expensive focus group exercise. To be honest with you, if you're a brand and you're operating in bricks and mortar in Europe, ask your Chinese customers why they shop from you and ask them why they don't. This quite often can be the most important information you'll ever get. Contact customers that have bought from you before. How did you hear about us? What do you like about us? If you have to incentivize them in some way, do so. Start to build up a picture of individual clusters that are actually buying from your brand. And if you don't have any of that information, you will have to do some robust research. But most of the people on this webinar have sold to Chinese consumers in some way, even if it's by accident through their website. So find out who your customers are, cluster them. Then you can work out where they hang out. Then you can work out what are the best platform plays for your marketing. And remember that WeChat is fantastic because it's a closed platform. You control the IP, you control the brand, but it's a closed platform. So with the best will in the world, if you have no followers, you're not going to be able to sell to anybody. So building up your follower base and your community within WeChat is the number one priority to sell product once you've got an e-commerce platform set up. And this brings me on to the last question, which is about KPIs. Somebody's asked, how on earth would I set sales targets for China when it's a new market? What I would say is you will have had some sales through your website in order to be the timing to be right for this anyway. You'll have some idea of what SKUs, so you should pretty much know what SKUs have sold for what price. If you see that there is a trend towards certain categories and certain SKUs selling, they're the ones that I would focus on first in your marketing effort. Have a look at when things got sold. So was it 11/11, a particular promotion you ran last year? Was it Chinese New Year? Was it Christmas? Was it Spring Festival? And try and work out what the sort of messaging, and work with somebody like us or with a consultant or with your team to make sure that the messaging is spot on. It's that messaging that needs to come first and foremost. So what are you saying and to what audiences? And then you can look at, well, what assets do we have? Video? Do we have animated GIFs? You know, how are we going to do this on the channels that we're promoting? So in terms of setting your KPIs, you need to be realistic, but you also need to look at historic data to see what your conversion rate's likely to be. And the best way to do that is Google Analytics or historical data from your customer services department. And the other thing I would say, and this comes back to the market research piece, is everybody on this webinar is an e-commerce player. So you're all operating in Western e-commerce and you're very established in the market. So you're perfect now to trial WeChat as a channel. But talk to your customer service department. All too often they're separate to the marketing department. They should be integral to the marketing department, and find out the sorts of questions your Chinese customers ask. If all the complaints are around timings and logistics, you know you've got to sort something out. Or if you might find that customers are asking for a particular variant of a SKU that you don't offer, maybe you adapt some of what you do. But speak to customer services and speak to shop staff. They're the two biggest sources of information that cost you absolutely nothing, that will impact and can be used in your marketing planning. So I would definitely do that. Anything I haven't answered, or you feel that there's something you need to be answered, please do reach out. Thank you for your time today, and follow us on YouTube, Emerging Comms, and myself on LinkedIn, and Peran, you're also on LinkedIn. We look forward to seeing you again at one of our webinars soon, and take care and stay safe.